dear. It's a pleasure always to come to you from our offices here in Accra and to moderate Jim Fitzpatrick for the Global Markets Encounter. I can see Jim is already there. But before I go to Jim, hi, Jim, how are you anyway?
I'm good, Ernest. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm fine here also.
You're looking very well, Ernest, I must say.
Yeah, nice. I'm much better now.
Glad to hear it. You've recovered.
Yes, exactly.
I'd say that conference can take a lot out of a man.
Oh, a lot of energy. Trust me, So many balls in the air to hold. So anyway, always a pleasure to see you, Jim.
Yeah, and you.
Yeah, great. So today I know you have also two guests with you. They are all ready. But before I come to you, let me say a big thank you to our participants for joining us always and being with us for this session. Also to our sponsors. We have had the EU, OACPS, GIZ as key sponsors for this program, and we like to express our appreciations to them. And Jim, now over to you. I know you are giving us an update. And today the focus is also going to be more on East Africa. So you are getting guests from Tanzania, who will be our next host for the ACA conference in November next year. And then also you are receiving Mozambique. So please, now I invite you to tell us what you have in stock for us.
Thank you, Ernest. Good morning, good afternoon. I hope you are keeping well, and thanks very much for joining us. We've got an interesting session today. We're going to focus on East Africa. We're going to focus on, well, I suppose the subject of the moment, the Tanzania, and we're going to focus on Mozambique, where the crop is beginning and which is always a very interesting discussion. I'm going to start off by talking about the market and just generally about the market situation. I will ask one particular question. Again, I'm going to ask the question we spoke a little bit about last time, 2 weeks ago, when I said that there were some signs of a demand slowdown. I'm going to have another look at that, update some of the thoughts on that. And then we will talk about East Africa. And we're going to focus on East Africa. And we're going to focus on East Africa with two very welcome guests. From Tanzania, we have a man with a long history in cashews and a man who's overseeing great changes in the cashew sector in Tanzania, changes for the better, I might add. Francis Alfred, the Director General of the Cashew Board of Tanzania, who is at this very moment joining us online, or so he tells me. And from Mozambique, I'm very pleased to welcome again Sebastian Antonio, who is from IAM, and she is the head of Department of Commercialization and Agro-Industry. Lucia has a long history in cashews, and she's worked on many complex projects. Mozambique has been making some great strides in the cashew sector, and she has played a major role in that. So I am again delighted to welcome our two guests, and we're going to talk about East Africa. We're going to do that in an interview format, by the way. So there's plenty of opportunity for you, if you wish, to join in, ask questions, make some comments, and be part of the discussion. I hope you'll take us up on that invitation. But before we travel to East Africa, virtually at least, let's have a look at the market situation. And just let's have a look at what's been happening. It's been an interesting period. It's not usually a particularly busy or volatile period, but it is certainly that this year. So I wanted to have a look a little bit from a calendar point of view, what's been happening and what's coming up. So over the last 4 weeks, we're going to take that. What we've seen is the East African crops have started. notably in Tanzania, Mozambique following on a little bit later. And the Brazilian crop, of course, have started. In the last 2 weeks, the Tanzanian auction has kicked off with real success, moving more volume than usual for the time of year, more volume earlier and at higher prices so far, which is really quite interesting. Looking at the reports from the Tanzanian Mercantile Exchange, the pricing is remarkably high in many ways, and we're going to talk about that. And the volumes, I think something in the region of 80,000 tonnes has been sold, and that's way ahead of any of the last 3 or 4 years. So that's interesting. Within the last 2 weeks, the kernels market has started to firm up a little. Now, I'm not saying that the market has moved up notably on buying interest. I think it's moved up as processors have upped their export offers a little bit. We've seen high prices at the Tanzanian auction, and perhaps that's in response to the kernels prices, but more likely the kernels prices are in response to the perception that maybe there is a shortage of RCN. And I did say perception, I didn't say fact. We're going to talk about that too. And you do see a reaction. But what's very notable in the kernels market right now is how much different it is when processors try to lift their prices by increasing their offers and withdrawing back from the market than when they try to do the opposite. So when processors start to push the market down, buyers back off, prices immediately fall. When processors try to stir the market up and raise prices, well, buyers are far less likely to follow. And in that way, the market tends to move a little bit more slowly. If the kernels market is being driven by more and more buying interest, it can go up very quickly, as we all know, and we've seen that already twice this year. Over the last 10 weeks, and this is a much longer period, what we've seen is the misalignment of raw cashew nut prices and cashew nut kernels. In any logical world, you would expect that raw cashew nuts, the raw material, and cashew kernels, the product, would be aligned. That there would be a calculation that I could go out today and buy 1,000 tons of raw cashew nuts and at the same time sell 250, 280 tons of cashew kernels and at least on paper make a profit. You can't do that today, and you haven't been able to do it for weeks. And that is not unusual, but it is notable at this time of year when normally in this period demand is stronger than supply. And in the last 3 weeks, we will have seen the peak Diwali demand. Diwali's coming up just around the corner now, and Diwali holidays will be starting soon. And this is a period when Indian demand for cashew kernels peaks. It's a seasonal market, and this is the time of year when it peaks. And if you don't get good demand in this period in India, you've got to ask, when will we see good demand in India? That's what's been happening over the last 4 weeks, but some of those factors have been there much longer than that, and some of them will continue. What about the next 4 weeks? What are we likely to see? Well, we will see Indian demand subside a little post-Diwali. That's normal. Sometimes there's a little bit of restocking after Diwali, but demand is normally less after the festival season. In the next 4 weeks, we will also see the retail demand in Western markets, again, for the winter holiday seasons, from Thanksgiving in the US all the way through to New Year, and even through to the end of January, February for the Super Bowl in the US. And that demand at retail level will peak, and it'll begin to subside into a much quieter period in the first quarter of the new year. Now, notably, I said retail demand here. We're talking about what the consumer is buying and how that's been distributed. The product to meet that demand was bought months and months ago. So sometimes people think because there are festivals, because Thanksgiving is coming, Christmas is coming in the Western countries, that you're going to see some demand in response to that. you don't. That demand, some of those products would have been delivered last June or July to processors to prepare for this season. Now, they may well engage in some restocking, but that won't happen probably until January, more likely February. These are companies that tend to buy forward, tend to cover themselves well in advance. In the next 3 to 4 weeks, we will also see the East African crop approach its peak. So Tanzania, with a great crop forecast, will continue, and the Mozambique crop will start to come in. A little crop in Madagascar too, not to forget that. We'll also see the arrival, maybe 3 to 5 weeks from now. 3 weeks is optimistic, I'd say, but maybe 5 weeks from now, we will see the beginning of the arrivals of this nice, high quality Tanzanian RCN in India and Vietnam. Might be a little bit optimistic on the dates, but around about that. So processing in December and January, maybe into February in India. We will see a critical period now in Southeast Asia. Cambodia, again, expecting a good crop in 2025. We're going to see flowering in Cambodia and flowering in Vietnam, and that will give us a good clue as to the condition of the next crop. And believe it or not, sometime in the next 8 to 10 weeks, which isn't that far away, the Northern Hemisphere crop will start again. So we'll start in Cambodia with early harvesting, and of course in Ghana, I mentioned Ghana simply as an example, but in West Africa we'll start to see December. Into January we'll start to see new crop arriving. So it's quite interesting now that we really are very close to the end of the season. Now in cashews we know that there's a long lead time between harvest and delivery of the raw material, but it is important to note the calendar, the upcoming, so we get an idea of exactly how the market might progress in the coming weeks. So I think in the next 4 to 5 weeks, about, based on forecasts from Tanzania and from Mozambique, about 500 to 550,000 tons will be harvested. That includes the remaining in Indonesia, Tanzania, Mozambique, and not to forget Brazil, which is also expecting a good crop. So that's going to happen in the next 4 weeks or so, but let's not forget that after that, it takes 4 to 8 weeks to get to processors. And that's because in our industry, as we all know, the processing is located very remotely from the main growing areas. And that's something that perhaps is changing, but it does create a lot of obstacles to fast delivery and traceable delivery of raw cashew nuts to processors. So that's what's going on. That's what I think we can expect. Let's have a look at some of the more recent price trends. So we've certainly seen prices on RCN move up. If we look at this graph, there's a couple of things at play. Yes, prices have moved up, but secondly, let's not forget that the available quality at this time of year. So we're talking about Tanzanian raw cashew nuts, minimum 48 pounds, but a lot of material, 51, 52, high quality material. That's one of the reasons pricing is higher. Indonesian raw cashew nuts, very high quality. Again, pricing is higher. So that is one of the reasons why we see prices move a little bit higher at this time of year. But we have also seen a rise in the market. There's no doubt about that. There are some lower quality products available. Some of them are held at origin, a little bit in West Africa, and some is at destination, mainly in Vietnam, but also to a certain extent in India. Big question marks around these factors are: who owns that stock? How strong are they in holding it? And to what extent does higher prices in Tanzania suit them to help them move the balance of their stock? In other words, is there a squeeze in the market, or is there an effort to create a squeeze on supply of raw cashew nuts in the market at the moment? mean, if you looked simply this year at supply and demand, you would definitely expect, with the lower crop, particularly in West Africa, in India, and in Vietnam, you would expect that there would be a tight position at the end of the year. But given the level of stock carried into the year, you wouldn't necessarily expect that there would be a tight squeeze and further rises in price at this time of year. So one of the big questions is, to what extent is this spike in pricing created, and to what extent is it a natural result of the fundamentals in the market? Let's have a look at kernels. And again, what we've seen on kernels is really that asking prices have moved up. And there are inquiries. There are a lot of inquiries for African cashew kernels at the moment. Those would be obviously based on fast delivery, for example. But other people are looking at quality. I know Tanzanian cashew kernels are in strong demand at the moment, and based on their quality, based on the availability. But volume is relatively light. So asking prices, and I'm picking a midpoint here. So I'm not talking about the top processors who may ask 15 or more cents above this level in Vietnam. I'm kind of picking a mid-price, mid-processor level. We're talking about 345 for 320s FOB. We can see that that price is now back where it hasn't been for a couple of years. We're back at the end of 2021 before we saw a decline in price. But prior to that, this range of pricing was pretty well sustained in the market. And if we go right back pre-COVID, right back to 2020, we would have been expecting that prices might rise to the current levels at that time. But obviously that was interrupted. And then we had this long period of low pricing. So if we look at this market around 345 offered for medium processors, and we start to consider some of the factors around that, if we look at the cost of raw cashew nuts, by my calculations, you're looking at, for Vietnamese processors, something in the region of $3.60. This is average cost, all grades. Indian processors, $3.89. And clearly based on that, raw cashew nut prices are too high for profitable processing. And I mean profitable processing without speculation, without selling kernels now and buying the RCN later, or doing the opposite to that. But certainly making money in processing based on today's availability, today's pricing on both sides, raw cashew nuts and kernels, is really challenging. And that even applies in the Indian market, which is somewhat protected and which trades at much higher prices than the international market. So you've, at this moment in time, it is quite difficult to see where the next moves are coming from. We have sustained buying in Tanzania. We have some interest in kernels. We've plenty of offers of kernels, of course, but not too much traded volume. Where are we going from here? One of the things we could look at is demand. So let's have a look at demand and let's ask that question: are there signs of a slowdown in demand? I'm going to start with raw cashew nuts, the in-shell cashew nuts. And if we look at monthly imports, so the red bar here is monthly imports in 2024 into Vietnam, as reported by Vietnamese customs authorities. And October is half a month. We only have the first 15 days figures so far. They were quite healthy. Now looking at it, you basically see that the market this year is lagging behind, not hugely behind, but lagging behind a little previous years, and there's no real sign of a slowdown in demand for raw cashew nuts from Vietnam at this moment in time. Now, whether they are in the hands of processors or traders is another matter, but there is no sign of a slowdown there as we look at it. If we look in India, again, now we're looking at import figures. So I draw my import figures from the Ministry of Trade, and the figures there we only have till August. We have informal figures for September, and again, August was quite strong It seems like a long time ago now, but August was quite strong, and we would expect September figures to follow and then to ease off October, November, December. But you can see, looking at the figures, I think total imports 835,000 tons so far compared to 868 last year. You can see again there's no real sign of a slowdown, and the strong start in Tanzania is an indicator of interest in further supplies of RCN. So the red trend line for India is interesting because that seems to indicate that India's imports might just spike up a little bit from September into October. You've got a couple of complicating factors in here. The ban in Cote d'Ivoire has really cast a long shadow over the market, delaying the arrival of raw material, which is probably much of it still on its way. We have the ban in Benin, which fortunately didn't really deprive the market of a lot of RCN, because Togo seems to have exported quite a lot in the last year. And from that point of view, what we've actually seen, rather than being deprived of supply, supply has been delayed. And that may make the situation look a little bit different. More of that in a moment. Let's have a look at kernels. So we're having a look at Vietnamese cashew kernels exports, and we're looking at a chart which basically tells us the performance versus 2023. So 2023 was a very good year, the previous record. It'll be broken in 2024. And so each bar tells us by how much the exports for that month in 2024 exceeded, or in the case of February, were lower than the exports for the previous year. So what we are seeing is that very strong start to the year, little hesitation in June, fabulous July, but there is a strong trend, and in any other year, 8% up in the first half of October, 7% up in the first half of August would be noticed as a very strong performance. But in the context of the first half performance, we would have to say it looks like there might be a little bit of a slowdown in exports from Vietnam right now. And again, a lot of complicating factors in there. Obviously, the first factor to think about is higher prices. So that will impact certain markets more than others. We'll have a look at that in a moment. But there are also factors, contract delays, contract defaults, a greater supply of larger cashew nuts, given the importance of Cambodia now as a supplier, and given the poor crop in West Africa, with lower crops in, a little bit lower in Cote d'Ivoire, significantly lower in Guinea-Bissau, and lower at different levels right across the region in West Africa. So there is maybe sign of a slowdown in shipments from Vietnam. We'll have a look at the import figures. So we're looking here at European Union import figures. Now there's a time lag, but it can be helpful still to look at figures going back to August. Bear in mind we have long shipment periods in this industry at the moment. So when we look at EU, this is the EU and the UK combined for comparison purposes over the past 3 years, and we see a really terrific performance in that region. Up about 10% for the year so far. These are actual imports rather than shipments from Vietnam. And what we're looking at is a really strong performance, 10% up on the year to the end of August. It may slow a touch, but it looks like it's been a really good year for demand in Europe. Again, with a strong underlying trend toward healthy snacking, convenience, very resilient consumers in the face of inflation. And now in 2024, we've seen easing of inflation, particularly food inflation, and more optimism in the economies. Low prices will have had a part to play in that too. But given that we haven't seen prices at retail level drop, as you might expect, given the prices of the last 2 years, this is quite a resilient performance. Look in the US, and again, we see remarkably strong performance in the US market. US imports are up 20%. We haven't seen a figure like this for decades. Up 20% in a given year is quite amazing. And it's not that 2023 was by any means a disastrous year. This is remarkable. And this is largely driven by price. Price is very, very important to the promotion, marketing, and development of the cashew sector in the United States. Interestingly, as an aside, that the factor of price has seen a little bit of a pushback on African cashew kernels over the last 12 months into the US market. So we are seeing advances in the African cashew kernels share in the European market, regardless of price changing. But in the US market, actually, African cashew share has, I suppose it hasn't really grown at all. After quite a good first half, it hasn't really grown since. So again, there's no real signs of a slowdown in demand up to that period. So let's ask the question then again, same question that we asked the last time: are there enough cashew nuts in the world? And of course, the unspoken part of that, in the world until Northern Hemisphere new crop. So we start with Vietnam. We'll have a quick look at the Vietnamese situation. So notably, the first thing is that the opening stock was strong this year. Both in India and Vietnam, there were strong opening stocks, given high levels of imports last year. The crop, some people will argue that the crop is larger than the number I put on the screen. If it is, it's not hugely so. It may be, my figure is based on hectares, average yield, and what we see talked about in the various agricultural forums in Vietnam. Imports, we know, imports 2.2 million tons, big number for the end of October, for the middle of October. And then Burma kernels, based mainly on Vinacast information, it calculates around 420,000 tons, and probably more than that. Put that all together, take our exports, a little bit of domestic, and we come up with a balance of about 551,000 tons, or about 2 months' supply. So that's tight. That is very tight. Now, there may be additional stocks in there. The Burma kernels may be higher because it's imported under a variety of HS codes, so it's difficult to track it. And the figure I have taken is conservative. It is a figure from Vinacast, and it hasn't been updated. So I'm being relatively conservative in that number. So this might be a little bit higher, but it is tight. There's no question about that. If we look at raw cashew nut imports for the year to date, down about 7% on last year. The first 2 weeks of October were about the same, within 1,000 tons of the same period last year. Now, last year, second half of October was quite strong in terms of imports into Vietnam, so it'll be worth watching that figure when it comes out quite soon. Exports in October, up in the first 2 weeks of October, up by 8% compared to last year, and up approximately 18% to the middle of October versus 2023. So that's a really strong number. And it is a question, and it is something of a puzzle to try and figure out how is that supplied? How is that remarkable export performance? And it is a remarkable performance. How is that supplied? How is it met? So we need to look at the Burma kernels. So I think that the imports of Burma kernels, that's the unpeeled cashew kernels, mostly from African countries, is up by about 50%. It's a very big increase. Despite that, it looks as if the stock levels compared to 2 weeks ago when we did a similar analysis are reduced by about 17 days, or about half a month. So it is tightening a little bit in Vietnam, there's no doubt about that. So it would need a pretty good performance in the second half of October to try and balance that back. In recent years, we've seen second half of October figures quite strong, but we've seen quite a wide variation. The highest was 194,000 tonnes, the lowest 112,000 tonnes. So you need to be at that top end of that range to start adding an additional month of stock in Vietnam. And this you can understand looking at that there is some concern. But essentially, we have to ask some questions here, because we know that there are some supplies around. So what is afloat? What has been shipped from West Africa, perhaps from Guinea-Bissau, perhaps from Côte d'Ivoire, and has not yet been delivered? And what we have noticed this year is that the physical arrival of stocks into the market has impacted on kernels prices. Now that's indicative of a business that's underfinanced. If time comes to pay for your raw material and you start to reduce your kernels price, it must be indicative that you're struggling for cash. And I think that may be the case in Vietnam. So that's the first question. The second question, what stocks are in Vietnam or in containers are arriving that aren't included in the import figures? Stocks of Burma kernels and stocks of raw cashew nuts. What are those volumes? We think they're significant, but it's never possible to absolutely answer that. That's different trading companies' business, and it's not something they would like to advertise. Either way, either if they're small or large, it's not something that they would like to advertise. Also, we know that the Tanzanian raw cashew nuts are available at auction if buyers choose to pay the price. They are very high priced for Vietnamese processors to try and meet international market pricing, particularly if they have sold contracts some months ago, but they are available and they could be available for processing during January. Now, it'll only be January because once we get to the end of January, we get to the New Year festival, to Tet. I think it's the 25th of January, if I'm not mistaken. And that means it's slightly earlier this year. Not unusually earlier, but earlier than last year. And that, of course, will stop processing for that period, a couple of weeks of holidays when most factories won't be processing. So key factors supporting the supply in Vietnam have been a strong opening stock and the imports of Burma kernels. And that is managing, so far at least, to supply record 18% increase in cashew kernels export. So the year will finish very strong. I don't think it'll finish at 18% up, but it will finish up in double digits. There's no doubt about that. Let's have a look at India. India now, again, we have relatively strong opening stock. I think my number is quite conservative on that. I've been conservative on the crop estimate. I've taken quite a low estimate of the crop. Initial forecasts for the Indian crop were 780,000 tonnes. We know it wasn't as good a crop as expected, so we've just plugged in a low number, 600,000 tonnes. Let's see where that leaves us. Imports, 835,000 tonnes. That is to the end of August. So that's the official figures. I'm not going to guess on September or October just yet, but we would expect relatively healthy figures for imports in those periods because, one, we know that material from Guinea-Bissau came to the market a little bit later because it was almost all shipped through the port of Bissau this year. About 180,000 tonnes, according to our good friend John Rao. And that's well down, by the way, on the crop of the previous year. But that should be on its way and arriving in India. Processed, if we take a figure for 12 months, I'm estimating just under 1.8 million tonnes of raw cashew nuts to be used in India, which would leave a year-end balance very tight. Now, let's explain that a little bit. This would be a year-end balance if no more imports came into the country. But obviously, more imports are coming into the country during September, October, November, and December. But it is an indicator that although there might be a lack of high-quality raw cashew nuts in India at times during the year, overall the volume should be available. Indian demand is always pretty good, but growth in Indian demand appears to have been quite sluggish this year. So the situation in India is quite subdued. If I calculate on what we know now and what we expect, I think Indian imports will finish something like 1.14 million tonnes, which would be slightly down on last year, which was a good year. Now, 1.14 million tonnes, that means that the imports over the last 4 months would go from 835 to 1.14. And the difference gets added on here. So that would suggest that there may be enough inventory in India not to justify stop buying, but to justify ordered, careful buying that makes sense. In terms of cashew kernels, we're talking here about the largest market in the world. India consumes somewhere in the region of 35 to 37% of all the cashews that are consumed in the world. Demand is under a little bit of pressure in India at these higher prices. Now, we're basing that on reports. There are no statistics that we can use, but certainly if we look around the market, and I chat to people, I listen to people's reports, I even look in social media in India, and certainly it does appear that demand is under pressure at higher prices. And it's under pressure because we have higher prices, but also because we have other nuts, almonds, for example, imported in North India, which are available more competitively. So high prices might damage the high end of the market. Gifting holds demand, which was an area that had been hoped would grow quickly this year. Some interesting presentations were made at the All India Cashew Association conference back some weeks ago. And what was suggested at that was that there was demand growth at the top end of the market, gifting and snacking, and demand growth at the lower end of the market in catering, but that the traditional uses in the middle were pretty sluggish. And it wouldn't be surprising, given the rise in prices, that would turn out to be correct for the year. So if I calculated, India might need something like 300,000 tonnes until the new crop in India. The new crop in India, we probably should start to plug in end of February as a realistic time for that. So 300,000 tonnes on top of the exports. It's a significant part of what's available, with about 120,000 tonnes already available in Tanzania, mainly sold, of course, plus about 550 to arrive into the market. 300,000 tonnes is a significant chunk of that. But there is the question as to, looking at the current raw cashew nut prices, how does that calculate for processors? And one of the key factors I think that can influence demand in India is the reduction in processing capacity. If people behave logically and they reduce their capacity when they're losing money, then you would expect less availability of kernels in the domestic market. That will impact prices to a certain extent, but if they're not available, you can't buy them, you can't consume them, and therefore you would see a little bit of a circuit of pressure on demand as a result. So looking at this market situation, demand-wise, supply-wise, and pricing, we think that Western demand is strong and remains strong, but it has done so based on lower import prices and strong underlying consumer demand trends. Next step, how does this behave when the higher prices really bite into supply? Given that in those markets, most people have bought forward, and if they're not working off low price contracts still, they're working off some kind of an average that has an element of low price contracts in there. If we look in markets in India and China, where there's less forward buying, markets are more responsive to price, there does appear to be something of a slowdown. That might also apply to markets in Western Asia, throughout the Middle East and North Africa, where price might come to play in the market a little bit more quickly. And there are some indications of that in the shipment figures from Vietnam. Supply-wise, Overall, it looks like very good crops in the southern hemisphere. Obviously, they're not all in yet, but it does look good. But let's not get too excited about it because southern hemisphere is much smaller crop than the northern hemisphere, and the good crops will add only about 4% to the overall production figure. But it does mean that there's good supply coming to the market in this period from September through to January. So for me, if we take the numbers, now this doesn't mean that the supply reaches the market. What it means is that if all the supply becomes available and can be bought and can be processed, that there's no real problem of supply. Intervening in that, though, are high prices, slow shipments, the auction system, which may take more time than a straightforward market system, the restrictions on exports from certain countries to protect local processing. All of those things come into play. So based on that, for now at least, I think kernels prices look sustainable. I think kernels prices at these levels can work. I think that they make sense for a lot of people. That's not to say we won't see a dip around the full supply from West Africa from end of February onwards. But at these levels, I think it can work for growers, it can work for consumers, it can work for processors. But raw cashew nut prices look too high. They look too high against the kernels price, they look too high against historical prices, and that is a big issue right now. Now, there is a problem with this that could cast a long shadow over the market. If we go into Northern Hemisphere new crop with very high raw cashew nut prices, buyers will delay buying. So if we look at buyers in Vietnam, for example, they have a different situation today. 5-6 years ago, they primarily relied on West Africa. But now, with the crop in Cambodia, probably this year hitting 850,000 tons, and I wouldn't bet against Cambodia producing a crop close to 1 million tons in the coming year. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm saying it's possible. Vietnamese buyers have a different time frame in terms of their access to supply from West Africa. So coming in with very high prices on raw cashew nuts that are not in line with kernels can have an impact right back to the farm gate in West Africa come January, February, March. And we do need to be aware of that, and we do need to be aware of the disruption that that could cause. So that's the market situation, at least as I see it. Interesting times, quite volatile times. But now let's go and hear from some experts in the regions. And we're going to start, I've introduced our two guests already. Francis Alfred is the Director General of the Cashew Board of Tanzania, and he joins us to talk about Tanzanian cashews. And we will come to Lucia Antonio a little bit later. Francis Alfred, Director General of the Cashew Board of Tanzania, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you keeping?
We are doing fine, but yes, afternoon now. It's 12:43 afternoon.
Well, forgive me. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Yeah, I'm good. We are doing fine. We are doing fine, Jim.
Great. Okay, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. I know it's a busy time of year, but it's much appreciated. And I think that our participants, our stakeholders all around the world will very much appreciate your participation in this forum. So we said we'd do this as a conversation. So I thought I'd throw you a few questions and feel free to, go outside the realms of the questions. They're meant to stimulate the discussion, not necessarily to define it. But
Okay.
first of all, I hear that we're hearing good crop forecasts for Tanzania. What are your expectations? What does the Cashew Board expect this year?
Yes, for sure. We are expecting to have a good crop this year. And I've said it's not be like, it will be more, maybe it will be the the biggest crop in history. So we are expecting to have a higher crop. Based on this situation on the ground now, we are having a bigger crop, which is of very high quality. So it's true. We're expecting increase in production as compared to the previous years.
Well, that's great news, isn't it? It's great news for farmers. It's great news for the country.
Yeah, for sure.
Can we expect the usual high quality? Has the bigger crop, has that in any way impacted on quality?
Yeah, there is no impact on quality. For example, as we are talking now, we are in the second week of the auction. The average of the cash we are selling the auction is 52. So this year, the good thing is that we've got high volume and the crop is of very high quality.
That is really good news. And I think we can see the high quality reflected in the auction prices so far. And when we look at the catalogues, I must say the quality does look pretty good.
Yes, for sure. Areas with good quality has been getting high prices. Warehouses with low quality has been getting a bit lower price. So quality has got bigger impact on the price which is offered by the buyers.
And what's brought that about? Last year we had a less than expected crop. This looks like a really good crop. How has that happened? What have been the interventions? Has it been the weather? What have been the factors?
Weather has been one of the factors because we had a very high good rain in the beginning, but there have been dry spell for a longer time of the period. Of course, we've been insisting on, we've improved so much on good agricultural practices and the training to farmers and how to store, harvest timely, and they keep well those cashew. But we've got very close supervision in the warehouse and in the AMCOS also. In the collection point and the warehouse, warehouse, we are having close monitoring the cashews brought to the auction. So we are monitoring very closely. Any material which is of poor quality, we discourage collecting it for the auction.
I think, as I understand it, the supply of inputs is very important for production in Tanzania. Has that system improved or has it changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it has improved. And this time, we supplied a lot of sulfur and we supplied it early to control pests and diseases. So that one also has probably a good impact on the quality of the crop, because they couldn't be affected by the fungal disease or pests. So that has contributed to the quality of the crop. There have been very good system of providing inputs to farmers in Tanzania.
I think you make the key point there that it was supplied early, and I think that is a key factor in ensuring that the crop comes in well. So in the long run then, I mean, do you think that we will see increasing production over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yes, I expect to have an increase in production because, for example, the prices which have got this year, it will encourage farmers to go even more, to improve even farms which has been neglected, to improve when they revamp them. Also, we'll know there will be higher demand also for seedling for areas where we are starting new plantation. And because we also as government, with this where we are going to reach now, we want also to maintain. So we'll be providing more efforts to improve, more efforts to make sure that we maintain what we have started from the increments, so that we maintain it. That's our mission.
It's fantastic. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot too much for numbers, but what do you think is a reasonable expectation in the next 5 years? Is a crop of 700,000 tons possible or even higher?
Yeah, 700,000 plus is possible.
It's
very possible. Yeah, okay. Because this year, the crop of this year will determine the amount you can reach the highest. So I know 700 plus in the next 5 years is very possible.
Wow, that would be a tremendous achievement. And I've always looked at Tanzania and seen that there's very large parts of the country where you can grow cashews. Is production of cashews spreading across the country? Is it spreading away from the traditional areas in the southern part?
Yeah, it's spreading to northern part, and which will result to extension of the season in our case. because there's the northern part and the middle part of Tanzania where we are starting cashew plantation, their crop will come a bit late, starting from January, February, March, April. But now, as we are talking, the major part of production is still in the southern part. The new crop in the mid-central and the northern part is still smaller quantity. But in the coming years, will have significant impact and a significant crop from those northern part of Tanzania and the central part of Tanzania.
It would make Tanzania a very attractive option for processors if there was a new crop, southern end starting in September and in the north starting February. That would mean round the maybe 6-7 months of the year supplies of new crop. From a processing investment point of view, it would be a very attractive country as a result.
Sure.
Turning to the auction then, it started really well. We see quite good volumes. We see higher volumes than previous years. And I'm interested in what are the dynamics behind that? So what are the key changes that have been introduced this year to help market RCN through the auction?
Yeah, the main change this season is that we have started selling cashew through online trading system. That's the major change which we have introduced this year. We know that has got impact, but also from this year, there are cases buyers buying cashew through auction and getting substandard quantity when they go to the warehouse. Now this year also we increased a lot of supervision in the warehouses to make sure that buyers get quantity and the quality as per catalog. So we want buyers to get value for their money. So we are having very, very close supervision, so that after the first auction, when buyers get their crop properly in the warehouse, we know that one will trigger even a better business and sustainable during our season. So those are the two major changes, introduction of that new system and the close supervision.
So what you see is what you get. If you buy 51 or 52, you get 51 or 52. That's
Exactly. If there will be variation, to be very, very small, because we are not selling by short in Tanzania. We are selling standard grade, which is 48 to 54, and the undergrade, which is 44 to 47. But although we are not selling by SOT, but now because buyers have been offering higher prices for good cash 52 for 53, we want those buyers who has offered good price on the catalog for the certain lot. When they go to the warehouse, they should get that lot related closer to where if someone paid for 52, 53, he should get that range within that one. Although we are not selling by short, but we want the buyer to get closer to what they bought during the auction, the online auction.
I noticed in the regulation that for certain areas you must export through the port of Mtwara, and I also noticed that I think is it Maersk Line has introduced additional services there. Are those now online? Are they operational?
Sorry, come again.
I was noticing that the new freight services we've been reading about offered from Mtwara Port, are they operational yet?
Yeah, they are operational because all cashew from the major 4 projects go through Mtwara Port and they are operational. Now we've got enough containers, and we are expecting the first ship to sail out from the port on 4th November.
4th of November, so that is pretty fast going.
Yes.
The auction started only, I think, on the 11th of October.
Yeah, because up to now, as we are talking today, in the 2 weeks' time, we've already sold the 107,000 metric tons already sold. 107,000 metric tons.
That's remarkable at this stage. 107,000 tons.
Yeah.
Sold.
107,000. So we've got enough cargo which can be shipped out of the country.
Okay, I mean that's bound to. So if that's shipped on the 4th of November, we're looking at let me think, that's probably possible to process that sometime in December at destination.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay, and that's quicker than in previous years. So that's a significant step forward. I'm also, it's also noticeable, I think, in the last couple of years that processing in Tanzania is undergoing something of a resurgence. We've seen additional factories set up. We've seen factories in Mtwara like Coastal Cashew. We had a guest from Coastal Cashew, James Mulhall, 2 weeks ago. And I noticed that the government has made a commitment to the development or redevelopment of cashew processing, because Tanzania was a cashew processor in the past. What are the supports and what are the measures that have been introduced to support the development of processing in the country?
Yeah, the major one has been to allow them to buy raw cashew directly from the farmers, where they could negotiate directly and they buy raw material from there. And looking forward, we are planning to have a mechanism where we could finance them to get raw material throughout the year. But we know these high prices a bit, they've disturbed them because some farmers also have had to hike their prices based on the market price of the auction. So it's been a little bit of challenge during this period when there are very high prices. Some of the buyers of the processors, they had already entered into contract with some of the, maybe they didn't expect this increase in the price. But we know in the few weeks time, our processors will be able to get raw material, no problem. And we'll continue to support them, even with the higher prices. In the next time, we are looking on how we can support them. We are very much determined to increase processing the country, despite the increase in the price of raw material or raw RCN. But still, our mission to support the process is still there. So we'll keep on looking on which way can we support the process more to be able to match even when there are high increase in the price of RCN in the secondary market.
Well, it's good to hear of the commitment to processing in the long term. It's clearly the way forward. The transition is often difficult though, because particularly in the case of Tanzania, with high quality raw cashews available at this time of year, obviously there's going to be strong demand, and we've seen that. So it's balancing that is quite a challenge, balancing the needs of processors and the need to export raw cashew nuts. That is quite a challenge. I've heard some of the processors, I chat to people all the time about cashews and about processors in particular, but some of them are saying that the access to farmers remains quite difficult. Are there any plans at this point to streamline that system of access for processors to farmers? This is just something that occurred to me this morning.
Yeah, the challenge has been because of the increase in the price in the secondary market. Most farmers now also, because they increase the price, so most processors, they are getting tough time to get raw material from the farmers, because now farmers, if a processor goes there want to buy for 2,500, while the market in the auction is for 3,500, most farmers has been rejecting on that one. And it's obvious, farmers, they want to get higher income, and everyone wants farmers to get higher income so that they can do more, they can produce more, and they can increase the volume. Because without farmers, there is nothing we can do. Even the processing in the country will not be sustainable, will not be possible. So we know what the processors are facing now, but we like to tell them this is just something which has happened unplanned. But we want to assure them this challenge will not go for so long, because we've learned this season how difficult it is for them to get raw material. But as we go along, we are going to find ways to support them.
I think
without discouraging farmers to get higher income. So we have to find a way which will balance those two aspects. Enable the process, but ensure that farmers get higher income also.
Well, it's essential, I think, that the farmers are properly looked after, given that they are generally the poorest people in the chain and the most in need of additional income. The processors, I think what's happening here is that the misalignment of international raw cashew nut prices and the kernels market is causing this strain in Tanzania now, as it did in other countries earlier in the year. And unless one or the other comes into line, it's going to be a tough year for processors. But we would hope that they'll stay in business. And as if the crop grows as you're saying it will, which is good to hear, it should be a good place to have a processing plant. I wanted to ask you, by the way, I've read about an industrial zone for cashews in Mtwara. Is that going ahead, and what stage of development is that at?
Now we've already taken electricity to the site. Electricity is already at the site. We've already drilled the one well to start with. We are going to drill 10 wells there. We've got a contractor for road networks, 11 kilometers road networks in the 354 acres we are starting with.
Yeah.
We've already got a contractor. We will start doing those road networks in that 354 acres we are starting with, out of 1,572 total area for industrial park. We are now developing 354 to start with, out of 1,572. So in that 354, we've already taken electricity there. We are now building 2 warehouses as demonstration there. We are also putting road networks. Also now we've advertised someone who's going to put the fence for that area. And we are in discussion with some of the investors who are willing to put in plants or invest there in that industrial park. So we are continuing. We have not stopped. All the plans we put, we are still in progress along those lines we have planned. So we have not stopped. We are in progress, and we are continuing with the project.
That's good news. So maybe 2025 cashew season, we could see some activity in processing there, do you think?
That our plan by next year season, at least we should be having 1 processing plant there, 2 big warehouses there, some operation at least started there at the industrial park, at Maranje Industrial Park in the coming season.
That would be fantastic. It would be with the African Cashew Alliance conference in Tanzania next year. There'd be a great opportunity maybe to visit as part of the conference.
Yeah, I would like to invite people to come to Tanzania, and I promise them that it will be a nice time coming to Tanzania next year. So I invite them for the ACA meeting. We are planning to have it in November, but we are still discussing with the ACA. So I invite all people to come to Tanzania.
I personally am looking forward to going back to Tanzania and having a look at the developments in the cashew sector.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Francis Alfred, Director General of the Cashew Board of Tanzania. Please stay with us. Undoubtedly there'll be a few questions coming up a little bit later on, but I want to move on right now and to talk to Lucia Sebastian Antonio from Mozambique, from IAM. Good
morning.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine. And you?
Yeah, all well, thanks. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Always a pleasure to have you online talking about Mozambique and talking about, like Tanzania, one of the longest cashew sectors in Africa. And Mozambique has for a long time been a processing power in Africa. I had a few questions around about, mainly around production and development of the sector. And we have noticed that in Mozambique, you've been quite go ahead on some of the policies and regulations that have been introduced over the years. Can you summarize for us what are the key policy and regulation changes over the past couple of years, and particularly related to this new season coming?
Thank you, Jim. Regarding the new policies, 4 years ago, we introduced the policy reference price, which is approved each year before we start with the the cashew marketing. So, and the first year, normally this we have a formula where incorporate indicators such as cost of production for the side of farmers, cost of production for the side of processor. We have the trend of the kernel and as well the profits. And we discussed in a committee with all the key actors. So before we start the season, we have this reference price which is indicators. What we have introduced now, we have a movement of cooperative where the farmers are be leading by a market analyst. They support the farmers to bring the proposal of the reference part for the cashew season, and it has been a good discussion because now the farmers has a voice, and then we have that a normal formula that we have on our regulation to compare if the farmers or the exporter are beyond the market analyst. Just to give an example, we have approved the reference price in September 13, and for this season, the reference price is about 0.74 USD per kilo. According with the trend of the market, we have our Tanzania with a higher price. So this is also a competition for us, but there's a good motivation for the side of a farmer because last year the price was very lower. And we also have a new policy reform which was approved last year on 20 July. And the goal is to set up principle that stimulates suitable environment for cashew business actors along the cashew value chain. We have increased the raw cashew nut export from 18 to 22%. We also has introduced zero tax on kernel export. Regarding to import tax on kernel, we have 10%, 20%. And it's very important to inform that export tax value allocated, 70% is going to production, to industry, 20%, and for research, we have 10%. Basically, those policy reform innovated that as a government body we have introduced.
It's interesting. What I'm hearing is quite a proactive policy. I'm hearing very inclusive policy, and the interests of lots of different groups of stakeholders taken into account. This seems an interesting way forward. There was one thing that was mentioned, which was the tax on Burma kernels. Has that come in, and how did that come about?
That's a very interesting question because, as I said, we have start to improve our cashew law. We approved it last year, but before approve the cashew law, we have many encounters, meetings with the cashew actors, and those the main goal of Mozambique government is to create job employment in the rural area. So by exporting Burma kernels, we have observed that those factors are employing less people or less population in rural area. And with the discussion from the side of processor, we heard that many of them are able to say no. We want to introduce a tax for Burma kernel. So it only comes from observation by the government, but among the processor, many of them are observing that we are processing white kernels, but there are other exporting Burma kernels, and they are not taxing. So we have to come up with this solution, with this innovation, but we introduce export on unpeeled kernels, which is 15%, 15%. So, and we will implement the low cashew next year. We will start to implement the low cashew next year by tax also the Burma kernels.
It's interesting. It is quite a controversial subject, and it has, a lot of governments set out to improve the employment in rural areas through cashew processing. And the introduction of technology, of course, reduced the numbers of people that were employed in factories. And then, of course, Burma kernels, which, as I was saying earlier, is such a big trade now, that's reduced it even further. So it is really interesting that you've made this, what I think is quite an innovative regulation, and I wouldn't be surprised if others might follow on it. It's also interesting to note that even in Vietnam, which imports most of these Burma kernels, that there is a discussion there as to the impact of that trade on jobs in Vietnam in certain districts. So really, really interesting, and it's also interesting that processors support this. But going back to some of the basics, thanks for enlightening us on the policy. What about this season? What are the expectations for the crop? Have we got any forecasts? What's the current situation?
Yes, thank you, Jim. We do have a forecast. As I said, we have approved the reference price in September 13. So due to different phenological stages of cashew in our country, the harvest season initiates early in the northern part of Mozambique. So the market season officially was launched in October in Cabo Delgado in Nampula province. Cabo Delgado is near Tanzania. So when Tanzania started, this province already started as well. And our forecast for this season is 160,000 metric tons against 152,000 tons reached last season. And we are hoping, we are expecting for a good harvest season comparing with last season. In the northern and center, in the southern season and center season, we are observing now the raining season, but the trending is monitoring the cashew tree. By the virtual meeting that we had with our delegation, they still monitoring, and up to now the season is going well. We hope that the season is going to be better than the last season.
Okay, that sounds optimistic. I'm just wondering about the timing. So you have, if I'm not mistaken, there's you cannot export until processors have covered their needs. At what point is it possible to export raw cashew nuts from Mozambique, given that there's going to be a pretty good crop this year?
We are working the three main ports. We work in Nampula, we have Nacala ports, and Sofala province, we have Beira port. And in Maputo province, we have Maputo port. So mainly the export are going 95% as going directly from Nacala port. But before we open the export season, it's important to monitoring directly and make sure that the processor has already accomplished they purchase, and with this interaction, we will officially open the export season. It's early now because, as I said, Nampula and Cabo Delgado started in October. So and then it's going down. The southern region and central region will start in November and December, and the end of the season is going to be approximately March 2025. So it's early now, but we at the end of on the first quarter of November, we will have more important information so that we can better decide if we can open the export season.
Okay, okay, that's clear. Thank you for that. Just going back to the production aspects, there was a lot of talk in the past about the issue of aging trees in Mozambique, Mozambique being a long time in the cashew business. Has that issue been managed? Has it been addressed?
Yes, that's a huge challenge for Mozambique. We have nearly our national orchard is about nearly 30 million cashew trees, and we have facing not only with the aging of cashew tree, but pests and disease are also our other challenges. And annually, we spraying about 10 million cashew tree. So we talking about national orchard of cashew tree of 30 millions. So and along the years, on the past year, we are observing the declining of production. So we have to take a major step, a step back, because when you have a low production and the increase is not with major impact, we also observe that the tendency of processing is going down. So what we have done, a part of elaborate or implement new laws, we recently developed the cashew project, the cashew value chain development project. This project aims to increase our national production for about 115,000 metric tons now to 670,000 until 2035 along the 10 years in the long terms. So in this project, we have to invest about 400 million USD, and we will tackle mainly on research. We will tackle also on the production. We will expand the technical assistance, and we will have to we have strategy to deal with the aging of cashew tree, because it's very important to know that with the aging cashew tree is not only to have new cashew trees, but also to find a way to use the old cashew tree to add values. By adding value, we can produce cashew wood, can be used on the manufacture industry. We can produce pallets. We can produce many varieties of material. So it's very important to tackle also these issues. With this cashew value development project, we also want to increase the assistance of production of farmers. From now we are assisting 200,000, so we want to leverage for about half of thousand of farmers directly assisting on this project. So we are eager to implement. Now we are looking for investor to support this major project. Thank you.
That is an ambitious target. So what we would see in the case, I'm just bearing in mind what we've heard from Tanzania and what you're saying, between the two countries, we're going to see, or we have the potential to see, large increase in production in the coming years. It's going to need significant investment, I'd imagine. But what about processing then? I mean, I think Mozambique has gone through 3 or 4 different generations of processing development and redevelopment. Right now, at the beginning of this 2024-25 season, how do you see the condition of processing in the country?
Thank you, Jim. I'm very happy to see the condition of the processing, and first of all, let me share our experience. Along the past 4 years, we observe a declining on processing because we had a major large company like Olam processing, employing about 10,000. And during the pandemic, Olam shut down their factories, which lead us to declining on processing. So this is a lesson, what we have to do now. Because most of these workers, which are working on the Olam company, they also gain experience, and part of them continues to do small scale processing. So what we have seen, we have to support them. And last year, we, in collaboration with FNDS, which national development partner from the Minister of Agriculture, we set up financial support for small scale processor, and they will start processing this year, and this will contribute with 2,000 metric tons of kernels, which is very important. A part of that, we have observed also the contribution of Sunshine Nut Company, also inaugurate a new cashew factory. So we are hoping to have this. They are not major step, but they are a step that give us hope that we have a work to do, and we are starting. Thank you.
Okay, an optimistic outlook, but still much to do, I suppose, would be the way to put it. Are there any examples of new approaches to processing?
Exactly, they are. For instance, I will take the new approach of Sunshine Nut Company, which use a vertically integrated approach and the corporate social responsibility. The Sunshine Nut Company, they process roasted kernel in Mozambique. It's the final processing. It's not primary processing. And they have a niche market in the United States. In terms of market strategy, Sunshine has already invested in quality control system, branding, and standardization. That's very, very important. As I said, recently they have inaugurated a new factory in Cabo Delgado province with capacity of 1,500 capacity. And the facility represents an investment of $1 million of USD, and the shelling factory consisted of 200,000 tree nursery. So we have not only the factory, but we have also the nursery. We have the warehouse to support the farmer, to provide training to the farm. So this will observe the cashew production in this region, because Cabo Delgado produced in average 25,000 metric ton, and there is no factory over there. So with this factory will boost the processing in this province. And Sunshine is also based in Maputo, and they upgrade the extension facility recently with a new warehouse. In Gaza province, they also has a new completed model village factory, which operates off-grid environment. So that's a new approach of this company, and we hope to have more than 10 Sunshine companies to boost the processing and in Mozambique.
Yeah, it is a really interesting story, the story of Sunshine Nut, and thank you for giving us that information. I hope at some point in the future we'll be able to have Don Larson of Sunshine Nut on the Global Market Encounter to tell us more when that factory is up and running. But for now, Lucia, Sebastio, Antonio, thank you so much indeed. It's nice to talk to someone that brings opinion and also some numbers. That's my style and I like it. Appreciate that. Thank you so much, and thank you to Alfred Francis, Director General of the Cashew Board of Tanzania. Let's go back to Ernest and see if there are any questions for our guests.
Thank you.
Ernest.
Yes, thanks so much, Jim, and thanks to Alfred and Lucia for such in-depth information from your respective countries. There are two questions, quick questions for each of them. But before we do that, let me remind you that the first session of the webinar on sustainable cashews will be taking place next week, Wednesday, 30th October. So we invite you all to register to be part of that webinar and to also know how we can promote a sustainability agenda in cashew before we have all those regulations some point probably catching up with us. So the two quick questions, I know Alfred talked about increasing production to about 700,000 metric tons. It's possible in the next 5 years. Lucia is also talking about the agenda for Mozambique to reach 700,000 metric tons also by 2035. Now, the key question that is being asked is, what portion of this are we looking at processing? And maybe will be good for each of you to tell us what portions or what volumes were processed in the last 2 years, including this year, and then what the expectation is for 2025. So maybe Alfred can take it, and then Lucia will also address the same question for Mozambique. Hello, Alfred.
Okay, thank you, Ernest. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. I hope you're doing well.
I'm good. Although, yeah, I missed some of the words. The network was not stable.
Okay,
Can
so
you please repeat?
Yeah, let me repeat it. You are looking at reaching 700,000 metric tons in the next 5 years, and Mozambique is also looking at the same by 2035. The question is, what volumes of this are you looking at processing? And to start with, in the last 2 years, including this year, what has been the volumes processed? And
okay. For example,
2020
our targets for production as a put also is so ambitious to reach 1 million.
Alfred, we missed what you said.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I said, okay, our plan is to reach 1 million metric tons by 2030. And while we are talking about increasing production, we are also planning by 2030 to process all the catch that will be produced in the country. That's our plan, and that's our mission. And that's one of the initiatives. That's why we've said the industrial park, where we could invite processors to come and put a plant, many plants in one area, to support them as a mission toward achieving that one. We want by 2030 not to export raw cashew anymore. That's our plan.
There was a question for you, so maybe before Lucia comes in, let me read that. The question was, is the industrial park policy aiming at the introduction of export ban as we have in Benin? So now you seem to be driving in that direction. Are you looking at the Benin model for Tanzania as well? Because it's the question of now you're heading there. Is it
No, we are not looking at the Benin model where we are going to ban export of raw cashew. We are looking at the quotas, whereby with time we can increase production, we can allow export at the same time increasing production. We want to come with a different model which will be more sustainable, because we know Beninians have done very well, although I know they are facing some challenges when it comes to pricing. But we want to come with a model which will be a little bit different, but which will not ban export of rockets straight away. We'll go step by step while we are observing the market, and we are improving process while observing the market, and while we are going for the target of for 2030. But in that industrial park, we'll invite you investors to come, not just one single investor, but even several investors coming in that industrial park, not just one company taking the whole industrial park. No. For our case, we are ready even to invite more than one processor invest in that industrial park, depending on the needs. So our model is a bit different, and we want to engage to look at the industrial park, but also accommodate other players in the industry without concentrating only in the industrial park per se. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And now, Lucia, what was the production in 2023, 2024 this year? And then what is the expectation for next year before you take your second question?
Okay. For this season, we are expecting the forecast production is about 106,000 metric ton. And the last season, we reached 142,000 metric tons. As I said, we start with harvest season recently, mainly in Cabo Delgado and Nampula, and then it's going down to southern and central region.
Okay. Now the second question, and maybe Alfred may help you also there, or he may come in because it also relates to Tanzania in a way. With the drop in production you are experiencing in Mozambique, is there any effort to discuss cross-border trade in RCN with Tanzania, or this is not within the policies that you are considering in Mozambique?
Oh, thank you, Ernest. I'm glad you raised this question because I am now with my brother, Dr. Francis Alfred. So it's important to note that we heard and we are monitoring the cashew season, and there is a culture connection between the Mozambican farmers and Tanzanian farmers. They share the same language in Cabo Delgado, which is Swahili. And when Tanzania opened the cashew auction and the price is higher, the tendency is the farmers to trade the raw cashew nut. The price is higher in Tanzania. So we need to coordinate because last year our registration, we have 700,000 metric tons be traded in Tanzania. So this year our price is half from the auction price. So the tendency also is to sell the raw cashew nut in Mtwara, and they are neighbor. So what we have to do, we have to sit together, we have to define a strategy, not only to have the better registration, but also to tax and find a way, not only, probably we are talking about 700,000, it may be more than that. But if we collaborate, if we strengthen our cooperation, we will have better results. And we can learn from Tanzania. We can also work with custom authority, not only for Mozambique sites, but also for the Tanzania sites. That's from my point, Dr. Alfred. I don't know if he wants to add something about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. Alfred? Hello, Alfred.
Yes.
Your view on the issue of...
Yes, Ernest.
Can you hear me, Alfred?
Yes, now repeat, please.
Yeah, so we are looking at, with the drop in production in Mozambique, whether it's not possible to have some kind of arrangement with Tanzania so that they can have the crop in Mozambique for the factories there. And Lucia also mentioned the fact that now, because of the price differential, it appears even more crop is going to move from Mozambique to Tanzania. And your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, as Lucia has said, you know the habit of people in the border. Yeah, some people, they're saying Tanzania, they're having their neighbors and their relatives are across the border. Some are still Mozambican, they also relative in Tanzania. So there is that issue, as Lucia has said. It's just the two parties to control on that one, and find the better way to control. If there are, for example, it is true when there is higher price here in Tanzania, most farmers from Mozambique, they would like to put cash to bring cash to Tanzania, although we know that income will be going back to Mozambique. So it's an issue which we need to work on. And although I didn't get you well, for the processing and maybe for us importing cashew from Mozambique or Mozambique importing cashew from Tanzania for processing, I think it's possible. Because, for example, like Tanzania now, Kenya, they are taking a lot of raw material from Tanzania and they're processing in Kenya. And they have not banned that. They buy cash from Tanzania and they export to Kenya to process. So even us, we can buy cashew from Mozambique, process in Tanzania. Mozambican can buy cash from Tanzania, so you can process in Mozambique. So there is no problem on that one.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alfred and Lucia. But before you go, it appears we didn't get the numbers for the volumes being processed in your respective countries for 2023, 2024, and indeed the expectation for 2025. I'm being held on for those answers, and we want to hear that from you. Maybe we start with Lucia. You have those
Thank you.
figures.
Okay, thank you, Minta.
Yeah.
Last year, our process we processed 80,000 metric ton of kernels, and for this season is early, but probably we will add about 1,000 metric tons. But it's very early to share about the processing kernels for 2025. It's still early because the season already open early, and the farmers are still harvesting, and the processors are on the farm looking for cashew to buy. So it's early. I think in January or February we will come up with clear date. But last year the kernel processed in Mozambique reached 80,000 metric tons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucia. And Alfred?
Yeah.
Alfred, we cannot hear you. Hello, Alfred?
Last year, okay, now can you hear me now?
Yes, hear you out now, yeah.
Yeah, last year we produced the 3,010 metric tons, and out of which 21% was processed in the country, which is around 68,000 RCN. 68,000 metric tons RCN was processed locally in the factories, and that which is processed by small-scale processors. For example, in Tanzania, in Newala and Tandaimba, we've got a lot of small-scale processors who are processing for local market, for East African market, South Africa, and some cashew being taken in Burma to China and the Arabian countries. So 68,000 metric tons of RCN was processed locally last year.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alfred and Lucia. Pleasure having you. And we know that a conversation for East Africa has just begun. And in good time, we will have you again to see how we are progressing in that region. And now I hand over back to Jim Fitzpatrick to tell us what to expect in the next GME, which has to be the 13th of November, because next week we have the webinar on sustainable cashews. The next GME will be on the 13th of November. So Jim Fitzpatrick, can you take it over from here and tell us what to expect in the coming weeks?
Well, Ernest, I think that there are a few questions that we need to look at over the next couple of weeks. I think that the first question is, will there be an easing of the demand for raw cashew nuts from November? In other words, if you cannot get the product to Vietnam or to India early, is it worth buying? And will that demand perhaps ease a little bit? So that'll be my first question. It definitely looks like that the closing stock of 2024 will be lower than the closing stock of 2023. Now, that's important because don't forget that this year, when we looked at the figures for Vietnam and for India, a large opening stock facilitated high exports from Vietnam and facilitated continued steady consumption in India. So that means that the impact of the earlier crops will set the tone for the year. Earlier crops means Vietnam, Cambodia especially, and in West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria. Earlier crops will have a big influence on how the market sets out next year. I think the question around the growth of demand of cashew kernels is important. We're not going to see, there is no possibility that we will see the same level of growth in 2025 as we have seen in 2024. Markets do not go up 30% and grow by 20%. So there's pretty good chance that it will calm down, a high probability that it will calm down. But there's also an outside possibility that we may see a slowing in growth. Now, I think what will happen is that it will return to the normal levels of growth, the trends that we've seen over the past 10 years. So no real threat there, but it's not going to be a bumper year in terms of growth as this year was. Next question, what is the level of forward cover? What is the impact of defaults on cashew kernels contracts on buyers' confidence? And I think that this is a key factor because it has been a disruptive factor this year. Undermined confidence undermines growth. And that could also happen in the RCN market. So how will RCN buyers, particularly Vietnamese RCN buyers with probably a very large Cambodian crop available to them, how will they act in Africa in the coming year? There's a couple of factors here. On the one hand, we have a lower closing stock. On the other hand, we have probably a bigger crop in Cambodia. And then we have the unknown factor, and that is that to what extent did the delay in shipments, particularly from Ivory Coast, to what extent did that undermine the confidence of buyers? Will they delay their entry into the market? And I think those are really big questions, and we won't get answers to that particular one really until February, but it's something that we need to start thinking about now. So next time on the GME, we're going to talk about a little bit of a retrospective on demand in 2024. What were the drivers of demand? What are the clues that we can gather from that to tell us what might happen next year? And I also want to have a look at the longer term, the balance of supply and demand over the longer term, bearing in mind some of the comments, for example, from our guests today, and many thanks to both of them for really enlightening contributions. But if we look at long-term supply and demand growth, where will the business be? Some people are saying that we need to limit the growth in production in order to balance the books. I don't believe that, but I think we need to look at it, and we need to start to look at the long-term supply and demand. So next time around, we'll have a look at that, as well as our usual look at the market session. So for now, for me, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Alfred Francis. Thank you to Lucia Sebastião Antonio from Mozambique. And thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. It's a pleasure. You can see my email address. You can see my number on the screen. If you want to get in touch and chat cashews, well, feel free to do so. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Same to you.
Thank you, and thanks to our participants. And see most of you next week. And again on the 13th of November for the next GME. And bye-bye for now. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.